Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on this Wednesday, Thursday hybrid version of the show. It's a short week for Oregon, which means it changes up the format of the show a little bit. Friday night kickoff, 6 p.m. Against a Michigan State team who's lost 2 games in a row. But we're going to kind of blend what we typically do on a Wednesday with a Thursday show. So we're going to have some score predictions. We're also going to have some thoughts and preview of this weekend's matchup between the Spartans and the Ducks. And I guess the first and obvious one we should probably talk about is the injury front. The biggest one from the game, it feels like, was Terrence Ferguson. The Ducks did not have their star tight end in the second half after he got popped really hard by former Duck Brian Addison on probably a poor throw by Dylan Gabriel. Just really led him right into that hit.
Hospital ball.
Yes. Lanning post-game said he should be fine. We kept him out of precaution, but it was a big enough hit. He didn't play where you're kind of like, let's see what life is like on Monday. Dan Lanning said again, like he practiced, but again, let's see what happens when we see the one time he practices on Tuesday. He practiced, so I think we can kind of put that one to bed, but there were some notable absences, some notable returns as well for guys that were at practice on Tuesday that we should probably talk about as well.
Yeah, Dan said Ferg would be ready to roll on Monday based upon everything we've seen. I'm all in on that. I think, Matt, when we were talking on Monday before we got that, I was thinking, oh, man, he's probably in concussion protocol. But as you said after the game, if it was precautionary then, it probably indicates he wasn't in concussion protocol for whatever reason and was just held out. So very good news there. Concussions stink as somebody who had one earlier this year. You never wish that on anybody. And those can certainly kind of derail a season for a couple of weeks if those come to pass. So great news there. Really, in terms of the absences, I think we can just kind of cross Bedford off being at practice for a really long time. This might be a season kind of deal. I don't know. We're speculating, but he wasn't there again. Gary Bryant, still no explanation. And then in terms of new absences, I guess Kyler Casper, Kamari Terrell, 2 guys that played on Saturday in Los Angeles were not, at least from our perspective, spotted at Tuesday's practice. Read into that, I guess, as you want. Could be they're both dealing with injuries, could be something totally different, but those are kind of the information. I think from a health perspective, honestly, you got Bedford, you got Florence, you got Bryant, you got Iuli, the guys that have been kind of out for a while here. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot else to talk about, I guess, other than looks like Jeff, based upon what he said after practice on Tuesday, Jared, is feeling back to 100%.
Yeah, Jeffrey Bossa said that he's feeling like his old self, so certainly encouraging. He got rolled up on in the first game against Idaho on either the first or second defensive series of the game. I honestly don't remember, but he got rolled up on in that game, only played 14 snaps, then came back and played 70 snaps against Boise State, but just didn't look right. There were plays where he would cover like a wheel route or go cover a tight end coverage, and he just wasn't Jeff. He wasn't running the same. He was kind of limping. He was just getting around the field. So we saw this past week against UCLA, his snap count went up. He played 34 snaps, which is the most since he played 70 against Boise State. He dropped back into coverage well. He got a sack, his first sack in over a year. He didn't have one last year, so that was his first since 2022. He was able to make open field tackles, chase down running backs, go out in the flats and cover. So he looked like Jeff Bossa. That's certainly going to be a huge positive for Oregon's defense moving forward. Not that their linebacker play was bad, but it always helps to have a potential all-conference linebacker come back and be fully healthy into your defense. So that's certainly encouraging. I don't really think there's a lot of other injury news. I think the addition of Kyler Casper and Kamari Terrell, it's just there. I really don't think that that's a huge injury news update. Obviously, you want them to be healthy. You want them to potentially come in and be a depth piece, but there's no, it's not Dylan Gabriel hitting it or Tez Johnson being injured and not seeing no practice. So overall, the defense is really healthy, other than Dakota Fields and Michael Gardner, but we knew about those guys for a long time. So it's certainly encouraging to see with Jeff coming back at 100%.
What stands out about this Michigan State team? Obviously, Jonathan Smith being the head coach and the familiarity with Oregon from his time at Oregon State, and Oregon's familiarity there with him. Aiden Childs is at quarterback. What was thought to be the heir apparent at OSU, and then Smith left and he followed suit. They brought a couple players over from that team. That they've got some offensive linemen at their tight end. I think a couple guys on defense, a bunch of assistant coaches, but it's a 3-2 team. And I'll be honest, like maybe it's a Friday game. This feels very much like a buzz last week, where it's just not a sexy opponent. Kind of knew that going into the season, but I don't know. I'm just curious if just like does anything stand out to you guys about this team? It's not like I want to come across like Oregon's just going to blow them out and dominate, and who cares about this performance? But at the same time, like they're just kind of like a middle tier Midwestern team that is 3-2, average.
Yeah, I mean, the Aiden Childs part is just going to make – I feel like covering a game he plays in is going to be really interesting, because this is a guy who has all the arm talent in the world. And I know listeners, if you're an Oregon fan, you probably haven't liked this guy because he went to Oregon State and now he's at Michigan State, and he's been talked about as this, superstar player. He was ranked. I know this is a thing that really bothered Duck fans, was he was ranked higher as a transfer than Dante Moore and Dylan Gabriel this offseason. And so there's kind of been, I think, a group of fans that have been hoping he would struggle with kind of the way he struggled. But I'll be honest, like this guy still has like NFL talent at quarterback in terms of the arm strength. He just makes a ton of mistakes. And that's kind of why I think my focus is sort of on him, because while I know Oregon's secondary has been really good, this is the first quarterback kind of with a pulse all season. Like if you go through the quarterbacks Oregon has played this year, it's a bunch of guys who don't have NFL talent, don't have NFL features. Yeah, they're just kind of guys. And that's totally fine. And frankly, some of them have performed a little better. Like, I don't know. I mean, Boise State, it wasn't like their pass game was awesome or anything, but there were some moments where I was kind of like, okay, they're testing Oregon a little bit. This is a guy who can definitely do that. And the counter is he can also give you a game, because he turns the ball over more than just about any quarterback in FBS football. 8 interceptions, I think 2 or 3 fumbles lost. He had a couple of turnovers against Ohio State. You go back and watch the interception against Ohio State. It was almost taken back for a pick 6 in the second half. Terrible pass, kind of provided the last scoring opportunity for that game for Ohio State. Game was kind of quiet, similar to the Oregon-UCLA game following that play. But this is a guy who, when he is able to throw the ball downfield, he can torch Oregon. And Oregon's secondary, again, hasn't really been tested. I'm not going to sit here and say Aiden Childs is going to come out and throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, because it's more likely he throws for 200 yards, a couple of touchdowns, but like 4 interceptions, because that's just kind of been the MO. But this guy certainly has arm talent. So I guess that's the thing I'm kind of focused on with Michigan State, is just kind of, is it possible everything clicks and he has a great game and it becomes more interesting, or is it just more of the same with him where he makes a bunch of mistakes and they have a couple of wow moments, but a lot of moments of like, this guy's still kind of a real work in progress.
Yeah, and I think he's still definitely a work in progress. He's a true sophomore. He played more than 4 games last year. He kind of like a little bit of a platoon with DJ Uyunglele. And you saw like his freshman mistakes, but you could see the ceiling for him. I mean, he has all the physical intangibles that you want in a quarterback. He's tall, he's built well, he's got a huge arm. It kind of reminds me of Dante Moore last year at UCLA. Like this is, being a quarterback is really difficult, in case you didn't know. And Aiden Childs is being thrown into the fire right now for Michigan State, and they're playing some good teams. They're going back-to-back weeks against Ohio State and Oregon. Like that's a tall task to ask for in a sophomore quarterback. You just don't see a lot of them do well in those situations. You don't see a lot of like true sophomore quarterbacks do well in a starting situation in general. And when they do, it's usually because they're pretty special. So I think Childs will get there. It's not this season. And I think those are growing pains. And I think Michigan State is going through growing pains just in general with a new coach, with the turmoil that surrounded the previous head coach at the end of his tenure. Like, there's some growing pains here, but they're going on the right track. I think Michigan State's defense is pretty good. I think they have a lot of really good edge rushers. I think that's going to be something to take consideration of. They have 71 pressures this year, according to PFF. Yes, they've played an extra game. So, like Oregon has 76 this year, but they played an extra game. So, but still they can get after the quarterback. And Oregon's offensive line has been really good in the last 2 2 games, I should clarify, because it's been more than 2 weeks. This is a team that's going to have better edge talent than what they've seen against Oregon State and UCLA. And obviously the big problem the first 2 weeks of the season was a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of mix-ups and bad communication. So I think this is a chance for Michigan State to kind of provide that type of circumstances again, and it'll be a good test before Ohio State next week. Just because the edge rushers at Michigan State are good. I think they're pretty talented. I think they're sturdy. I think all Jonathan Smith coach teams are well-disciplined. And while this Michigan State team is kind of up and down in terms of the penalties that they get per game, it's still disciplined enough. And they're going to run some exotic stuff. Defense is a little bit different than it has been in years past, with specifically under Jonathan Smith and at Michigan State. But I think it's a solid team. I think this could be a closer matchup than some people expect. But I also think that Oregon, like every week it has been, is just the far superior team on paper. And again, if things execute, it's the same message every single week now. If they execute, they should win this game by 24.
Yep.
Jared's right about the defensive line. Like 5 different guys on that team have 2 or more tackles for loss through 5 games. I know it's 5, like Jared pointed out, 5 games. That's a ton of depth from a production standpoint. We had Stephen Brooks on from our Michigan State site, and he highlighted that, saying like this is a team that they don't really have like a superstar player that's above and beyond everybody else, but they just have a lot of guys that are making plays. And he said it was kind of unexpected considering maybe Oregon's best defensive player, Derek Harmon, was their guy last season. And then they lost another starter as well. And they've done a really good job. So Jared's right. Like the defense there is solid. I look at this game like this is an appetizer game for Ohio State. Like they're going to push you. They're going to test your weaknesses a little bit, but the reality is you should still be able to overcome those if you have a bad game and win, but they should still give you a really good test. And it's kind of one of those, like maybe it's close in the first half, and then in the second half, just 3 drives is the difference where Oregon scores 2 straight and they get 2 stops. And next thing you know, a 10-point game or a 7-point game turns into a 21 or a 24-point game. And you look at it like, they hung with them for a while and then Oregon just kind of pulled away. Very similar to what happened last week for them against Ohio State. Like they walked off the field like feeling like they played well, but the scoreboard just didn't indicate it.
Most talented team top to bottom Oregon's played, you think? Michigan State, would you agree?
Probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Boise State obviously has the most talented player Oregon's played so far. Maybe honestly, like the most talented offensive player.
They might be the most talented team.
Yeah,
I don't think about it. I don't know.
Maybe, but like
pretty comparable.
Yeah, let's say they're comparable. But the reason I bring that up is to the point we had earlier. Like Oregon is much better than Michigan State. I don't think anybody, even on a Michigan State side, even as Steven said, is going to suggest like, oh, the Spartans are the better team going into this. But I do think they are a team that like has athletes to make life a little more difficult than like some of these games. Like I think Oregon State in particular, like Oregon's offense, it was just the resistance wasn't there. The athletes weren't there. Oregon's game plan, a lot of that game was just like we can get the ball in space and just brutalize these guys. We're going to break. We're going to force them to miss tackles. We're going to create open space where there's large yards after the catch because there's just no one around. We're going to kind of power between the tackles. Michigan State at least has a little bit more size, a little bit better athleticism. Jordan Turner is probably a defensive name to mention. He's their leading tackler. Yeah. I think is the tops in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. He had a pretty significant interception last week against Ohio State. So they've got some talent there. So that's why I think like absolutely. And we'll do our score predictions at the end of the show. I'll be curious to see kind of where we land from a margin perspective. I absolutely think this is a game Oregon can cover the spread, or a game that they can win by, again, what I consider to be a blowout, which is 3 scores or more. There's no question about it. It's also a team though, that I think has, like if they kind of are connecting and they play their A game, Michigan State that is, with Childs and I think Nick Marsh is a really intriguing young receiver. Montori Foster is another name to know there. I think there's a kid named Glover that caught a touchdown against Ohio State. Like they've got some guys on the outside. Like this is a team that could get kind of sneaky and make things interesting. Like I wouldn't totally discount that. Like I think there's a little bit more pop to this offense maybe than some of the other offenses, especially through the pass. But at the end of the day, like if Oregon executes and plays well, this is not a game that should be competitive in the third or the fourth quarter. And it's a game that, frankly, I think you should come out feeling like, hey, that was a dominant win. Let's go to Ohio State. That's 3 straight in a row where we've won pretty convincingly against improving competition. Like I think you would say a step has been kind of made. Again, Boise State, I guess, excluded, but you'd say, okay, from Oregon State to UCLA to Michigan State, there's kind of an increase in talent or total team, quality from that group. And I would say it would be pretty impressive, or at least a good sign going into Ohio State to win 3 in a row convincingly, where it's not interesting in the second half, really.
Yeah, I think this will be the best offense that Oregon faces, or at least like in the last 3 weeks or 3 games. I think Boise State has the superior player, probably the best player they played all season in Ashton Genty. But turnovers have just really hurt Michigan State so far through their 5 games of the season. Like they had 484 yards against Maryland, but 3 turnovers. That was a 3-point game. Like that, they're averaging 7 yards a play. Usually that doesn't mean that the game ends in 3 or a 3-point differential. 7 combined turnovers in the last 2 games against Ohio State and Boston College. Against BC, they're averaging 5.4 yards per play. Those are games that they should probably win. They could be very easily 4-1, because I don't think really in any world they're going to beat Ohio State. But in a game like Boston College, where I think BC's good this year, but that's a game where you're averaging 5.4 yards per carries, but you have 4 total turnovers, 3 interceptions, and 1 fumble. That's tough. So if Oregon can force some turnovers early, that certainly helps. And I think that could ultimately be a huge difference maker in terms of maybe when this game is over. Because, the last 2 games for Oregon, it's been over going into the third quarter. And again, Oregon wasn't great in the second half against UCLA, but that game wasn't close. At no point was that game actually close. And the same thing with Oregon State, like Eric mentioned, where they just out-athleted them. But if Oregon gets some early first half turnovers against Aiden Childs, who, like we talked about earlier, very susceptible to be throwing interceptions, that'll help just get Michigan State's offense off the field, put Oregon's offense on the field, and put some more points up, which I think can be more than likely the case, just because of how often these turnovers seem to happen for Michigan State's offense.
I'll be curious to see what happens at quarterback. What happens if Aiden Childs has 2 first half turnovers like Jared's talking about? It continues to mount. And they've got a backup quarterback that's the record holder from an FCS school in North Dakota, in Tommy Schuster. He's played in 2 games this season. He's a 4-year starter at his previous school. He's 42 career starts. This is a guy that's played a lot of football. If they look at it and be maybe things are getting out of hand, do we see a change? I don't know. Just something out there. Childs has he has not protected the ball at all. And you just wonder, at what point does that become a deterrent? And maybe we see another guy play. He's played twice this season. He played in the opener, and then I think he played against Prairie View A&M. But he hasn't played a ton, but he's played in 2 games. But I don't know. Just something out there. Wouldn't surprise me if we maybe see even a series or 2 where they just throw him out there randomly. He's done that. Jonathan Smith's done that at previous stops.
Yeah, but I think he's done that when it's the young, enticing quarterback like a Childs. I get your point. And if you look up and through the first half of this game on the season, Aiden's thrown 5 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. That's unequivocally very bad. I mean, it's just not a good rate at all for any quarterback at any level. At the same time, I think this is their guy for several seasons, and I don't think you want to interrupt that by yanking him, unless the other guy comes out and you think can actually win a game for you. But if you thought that was the case, he'd probably be your starter already. So I don't know if I expect that. One other thought I just had on Michigan State's kind of ineptitude, as Jared pointed to the turnovers. They're terrible in the red zone. This is the worst red zone offense in the Big Ten, and I think the third worst Big Ten offense in all of Power 4 football. 18 trips, which is actually a pretty good number. That ranks right in the middle of the Big Ten in terms of just attempts there. And they have played the extra game, which we need to acknowledge. but only 12 of those have gone for scores. So on a third of those drives, they don't come away with any points in the red zone, which is a real tough kind of statistic, and also a mark of a young quarterback who gets the ball down there, but maybe isn't able to execute everything when you get close. I mean, only 7 of those 18 have gone for touchdowns,
that's not great.
Terrible, just real bad.
Yeah. The last thing I have in terms of kind of previewing this matchup is Michigan State's offensive line rotational situation going on at tackle and for the rest of their offensive line. Like Ashton Lipo and Rakeem Johnson, they've been kind of moving around at tackles. Lipo's been their right tackle, but Johnson has went back and started and played at left tackle this past game against Ohio State. Neither of them were quite good. Lipo had a pass block grade of 5.3 against Ohio State, and Johnson had one of, I think, 20.3. Let me pull that up.
And for listeners who aren't familiar, that's on a scale of 100.
Yeah, it's not great. And when you see the type of competition that Michigan State has played, like when they played Prairie View A&M, their pass blocking grade was great. When they played Boston College, it really wasn't that good. And when they played Ohio State, it really wasn't that good. So this could be an opportunity for guys like Jordan Burch, Tatum Tuioti, Mateo Uiagalelei, or if they split somebody wide, I don't know. But this could be an opportunity for them to kind of go off the edges. Now, I think the interior of Michigan State's offensive line is pretty good, cemented by Tanner Miller, the Oregon State transfer at center. I think they're pretty good. I think that could be a little harder to get some pressure rates, but I think Derek Harmon, a guy who transferred from Michigan State in the spring, understands what's going on with the offense for some of it. I'm sure they've changed a lot since, but like he has an opportunity to really be a game wrecker. If Oregon can get interior and edge pressure on Aiden Childs, I think that's potentially where some of those interceptions will come from. They're going to have to figure out how to diagnose and disguise their defense pretty well too, because I think that's the biggest problem with young quarterbacks is just their ability to read a defense. And Dan and Tosh Lupoy, what they do best are these simulated pressures and trying to disguise what they're actually going to run, whether it's going to be a cover 2, but they line up in like man-to-man, or look like a cover 3. And when they drop back, Childs is just confused or thinks there's not going to be a guy there and someone's lurking. So that, and combined with pressure, I think could be kind of tumultuous for Michigan State's offense. But this is why you play the games. We don't know.
Well, and on that topic, maybe we can go to break after this, Matt, unless you had something else. But I was just going to say, what is Michigan State's offense built off of? It's run game and then play action pass.
Yeah.
Play action passes, historically, those take a little bit longer.
They sure do.
Correct. And against, an offensive, or I guess Michigan State's offensive line may be susceptible, I'm saying, for having to hold those blocks a little bit longer against the pass rush. That is, I think, pretty dynamic. It's been interesting. I don't know if Oregon fans have appreciated. I know they don't have a humongous sack total, but this has been a very disruptive front so far. And again, poor quarterback play, kind of hard to measure some of this, and we'll see a little bit more coming forward. I think this would be a good example of that, just because you're going, again, an inexperienced quarterback we've already talked about who makes a ton of mistakes, but certainly one who you want to affect his pocket if you can, because if you don't, there's a chance he can make things really difficult on you.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into our team props and game predictions for this Friday night game. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Last week was a very good week for our guy Jared Mack, 8-2.
Ooh, Jared.
We're
and
figuring
Eric,
out the
any
teams
other
here.
week, you would be like the winner, 7-3. But Jared, 8 is pretty impressive. I went 5-5.
Figuring it out.
Standings, Eric's still in first place, 23-17. Jared, though, has caught a ton of ground, 21-19, and I'm 18-22 on the day. So, all right. I guess I'll just go team props. Or, Jared, your team props. So
I sure am.
You can start off first, and then I'll go, and then Eric will finish.
Yeah, let's jump into it. Team prop bets. First one I came up with was over-under for 450 total yards of Oregon's offense this week. I took the over. I think they're just going to have a lot more opportunities. I think there's going to be some interceptions thrown or maybe a fumble loss from Childs off the edge. And I think they're just going to have a lot of opportunities. And again, despite maybe the second half struggles against UCLA, I think they're firing on all cylinders. I think they're doing really well right now.
Yeah, I think the offense is catching a bit of a bad break because of a really weird second half there and a weird conclusion to the first. But you look at the season here, they've hit 450 2 out of the 4. UCLA, they didn't hit it, but 431. And again, if that game goes a little differently, like they're very much capable of hitting this number, I think, every week against this kind of competition. So I also went over.
I picked over. I just don't think Michigan State has the depth to hang with Oregon for 4 quarters or a short week. Their secondary's really thin, especially at safety. I just think there's going to be an opportunity or two where a big play breaks. Dan Lanning's talked about it. They're real close to having these break. I think it happens Friday night.
All right. Next team prop, I have over under 5.5 tackles for loss. So I took the over. Oregon had 7 last week against UCLA, which is not their season high. It was actually against Idaho where they had their season high. Ohio State had 6 this past week. I'm going over here just because this is a defense that has a lot of kids who have played a Jonathan Smith offense. And if you've watched Michigan State tape, you will quickly realize that this looks very similar to what Oregon State has done the last couple of seasons. So I think that's going to work to Oregon's advantage. I think they're going to get in the backfield. Like I mentioned, with the pressure rates and the pass blocking grades of their tackles and their interior alignment, I think there's a lot of opportunities for those types of plays. So I'm taking the over 5.5 tackles for loss.
You nailed the line here. Oregon has 21 tackles for loss in 4 games. Do a little math there. That's basically 5.5 per game. So
Thank you.
Right on the cusp. I went under. I think it could be really close and kind of go either way. But when they played Boise State, they only had 4. When they played Oregon State, they only had 3. As you said earlier, Oregon State kind of maybe the most synonymous in terms of an offense that you'll play with regards to Michigan State. So I'm taking the under. But you nailed that line. I think if it was a little lower, I would have gone over.
I'm also taking under. I don't think they're going to have a ton of success running the football. And so I think we're going to see actually Michigan State throw the ball a lot. And with Child's legs and ability to escape pressure. And then also I just think they're going to go quick pass game. There's just not going to be a lot of opportunities. So I went under.
Last one. Over under 3.5 different touchdown scores for Oregon. I went over. I think this one is probably going to hit pretty easily as long as Oregon's offense does well. Kind of feeling maybe a T. Ferg game, a couple Tez Johnsons, maybe an Evan Stewart. Who knows? But I'm going to go over 3.5.
A tight end hasn't scored a touchdown this season. Maybe that changes here. That would be something. It's kind of, I'm sort of surprised actually, because considering how involved both Ferg and Sadiq have been in this offense. But I did go over as well. I think, and maybe this is the week where a tight end gets in there. But there's so many different players capable of getting the ball to the end zone in this offense. And frankly, as we've seen, even on special teams. So I went over.
I also went over. I had my score in my mind, and I started thinking about it like, man, like, I don't think these guys are all going to score multiple touchdowns. So I just think it goes into a play where Oregon's got a lot of dudes. I don't think they're an offense that force feeds one particular player or 2 particular players. And that's just going to lead to 4 guys or more scoring touchdowns. All right. Offensive prop bets. Dylan Gabriel over under 72% passing. Felt like this one was kind of easy. But it just speaks to how good he is that we're saying 72% is kind of easy for Dylan Gabriel. But I just don't think he misses very often. I don't think Oregon takes a ton of chances. They don't need to take a ton of chances. And so that's going to create a really high percentage for him of completions. And so I'm taking over 72%.
You're right, Matt. This is like one of the easier ones. And when you think about it, it's kind of crazy because 72% for most quarterbacks is a pretty hard rate to reach one week, let alone every week. And Dylan has reached that and more every game. In fact, he was over 80% every game until the UCLA game where he completed a lowly 75% of his passes. So I think I also went over. I think this offense is so conducive to high completion percentages and rates like that. So I think almost any quarterback who's accurate is going to be able to complete over 72% in this offense, and Dillon is certainly that.
Yeah, we're going over. I really don't think that there's a chance of him going under. I think just what Eric said, this offense is so, high completion percentage oriented with easy throws and everything like that, that I think it's just going to be really difficult for him to ever go under like 70% this year. Not that it won't ever happen, but it's going to be difficult.
I was just going to say, like, at what point does this become, like, this feels stupid to say 72% should easily happen, because it doesn't happen all that often. But at Oregon, like you said, Eric, like if you're an accurate thrower in this offense, you are going to have a really high chance. Does this ever come down? Like, do we think it ever drops below 72%?
With a young quarterback like Dante Moore, maybe something like that. And just for context, there's 8 passers in the entire country over 72% right now. And that just sort of speaks. And Dillon leads the country with 81. I think this offense is built for this, and there might be a guy or two that has a hard time initially. Like I think a younger quarterback maybe, but certainly a veteran like Dillon, a guy like Bo last year. These quarterbacks who have certain skill sets fit really, really well in what Will wants to do, and it's not a surprise they're really accurate.
Okay, I went Oregon football over under 4.9 yards per carry. This is a pretty big jump from their season average, which is 4.32. It's the lowest it's been as far back as 2016. I didn't check beyond that, but that's pretty wild to think about. For some reason, though, I think they're going to go over. I think we're going to see a commitment to the run. I think we're going to see an Oregon team kind of play into an overzealous defense that's going to try and create sacks and tackles for loss and play right into that over pursuit. So I'm going over. I think Oregon's running backs will have a big day.
Yeah, I also went over more than anything just for the idea that they're going to maybe just to speak into existence, the idea they'll have some explosive runs for once, because there hasn't been any this year aside from Dillon's in Corvallis and a couple from Noah in Corvallis. Like outside of the Oregon State game, I don't think there's a single run over 20 yards all season. Yeah. So Michigan State's fine against the run, 8th in the Big Ten, allowing 3.13 yards per carry. That's pretty darn good. And as you said, Oregon hasn't exactly lit the world on fire on the ground, but I'm predicting a little bit of a breakthrough here from the run game, and maybe Jordan finally gets through that second level, breaks a tackle, and can take one to the house for 50 yards or something. But I went over.
Yeah, I went under. I will see it when I believe it, because Oregon has been up and down with their running attack. 2.9 yards per carry week 1, 3.0 week 2, blistered Oregon State at 7.5, and then 4.3 against UCLA, where that really wasn't that good of a UCLA defensive line. I think that Michigan State's defensive front is actually pretty good. Like Eric said, they're holding opponents at 3.1 yards per carry. They held Boston College, which is a really run dominant team, to 3.5 yards per carry on 43 carries. So I don't think Oregon's going to run the ball nearly that much, like in the 40s. So maybe it's going to take some big hitters to kind of up that average. But again, like if they're right at that 4 mark, that's not bad. Like that, you still take that most days of the week. I'm going to go the under here.
This is another one that I felt like was maybe a little difficult to pick. Very random too.
Yeah. What was this one? Go ahead. What is this?
I'm just thinking like explosion plays, and I look back of some of the games, and play in the stats sheet that we get for online stats, live stats, we get plays of like 10 or more yards and the descriptions of them. And I was just kind of like, I'm just going to pick a number, and it's Oregon's offense over under 12 plays of 12 or more. Last week, I believe the number was 7. So it's a little bit high, but I also think there was some funkiness in the second half. There was, a couple things that just were weird about that performance. I also don't think Michigan State's defense is going to be like a steel curtain where big play opportunities they're going to be there to be had if Oregon just executes correctly. And, I just decided, hey, let's do this. So I'm actually thinking it's going to be a big game. I don't think it's going to be one in which, we're going to see like a 55-yard touchdown pass followed up by a 45-yard touchdown run. Like I don't think we're going to see those type of explosion plays, but I think Oregon's offense is just going to have this kind of like 15 yards here, an 18-yard run here, and then a 2 straight passes of 20 yards. Like it's just going to be boom, 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 real quick. So I'm going over 12. I've got a lot of confidence that this team's going to show up for once.
Yeah, my issue was I think it's an interesting stat track. 12 yards was, I couldn't find any place online where they track 12-yard plays. Like college football stats tracks 10-yard plays, and Oregon's had 69 of those in 4 games. So I was doing the math, and it's like, well, maybe that's pretty close. But I went under in part because like I don't know how many 12-yard plays Oregon is averaging right now, or if that's a good number. It seemed a little bit high, and I guess Matt, enjoy going through the box score play by play and identifying.
It won't be very hard. It will not be very hard.
Right.
No, yeah. Stat broadcast does a good job.
I did go under, to be clear.
Yeah, I went under. Against Oregon State, they had 12 or more yards on 15 plays, and they put up 49 points. I don't think that they're going to put up 49 points against Michigan State. Against Boise State, they had 6 plays longer than 12 yards. So yeah. I went under. I think it's a little too high.
Okay. Eric goes now for his defense.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got over under 1.5 defensive turnovers forced. I went over. Aiden Childs is basically averaging this per game right now. And this is a team where, like we saw it last week, UCLA turnover prone team. Oregon did a good job, took it away twice. This week, Michigan State turnover prone team. I think there's a good chance to take it over twice or more on Friday.
Yeah, I went over here. There's law of averages. Like Eric said, this is kind of what Aiden Childs is doing on a day-to-day basis or game-to-game basis, I should say. And I think Oregon's defense is going to really try to confuse him. Like I mentioned earlier, just simulated pressures and mixing up zone and man looks. So I think they could get as many as 4, but I think it'll be over 1.5.
I took Eric's approach of just Aiden Childs basically averaging this by himself.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to say yes, over.
Next one here, 4 yards per carry over under for Michigan State's offense. I went under, and I think I was swayed a little bit, as maybe Matt was, by Steven's comments about how bad their run game has been and how the stats don't really tell the story. I think Oregon's going to be able to bottle this up. I mean, we saw Oregon against very inferior competition in terms of a run game with UCLA, really just hold them under 50 yards for the game. I think it probably won't be quite like that, but I think this is a game where Oregon's rush defense makes Michigan State's offense pretty one-dimensional and forces Childs to throw. So I'll go under.
Yeah, I'm going under as well. It's kind of the same story with Michigan State. You look at like the games where they play poor competition in FAU and Prairie View A&M. You're like, these are really good numbers. And then against Maryland, BC, and Ohio State, you're like, this is probably more like the team that's going to take the field. So in those games, they did not have higher than a 4-yard per carry score in the games against Maryland, BC, and Ohio State. So I think that's going to be more of the same. So I'm taking the under.
I looked at this and think Oregon's strengths play into what Michigan State wants to do offensively. I think Oregon's really good up front along the defensive line, especially with Bossa being back now at linebacker and being healthy and being able to be productive. I think this is a great game for Bryce Betcher, Justin Jacobs. And I know Oregon averages over 4 yards per carry this season, just barely 4.11. But I would be real curious if you took away what Ashton Jeanty did, if he wasn't on the schedule for Oregon, what that number would be like. Because he's maybe, in my opinion, the best player in college football. And he's going to inflate the stats tremendously. So they do not have Ashton Jeanty on this team. They don't have a player close to that level. The offensive line has really struggled. So I'm gonna take under as well.
And the last one for our props before we get to score predictions, we've got Nico Reed over under 2 passes defended in this game. I set this line because Nico was targeted pretty early and often against UCLA. Thought he held up okay, not his best game. I'm going to guess Michigan State's going to put the tape on and want to target him a little bit as well. I don't think Jabbar Muhammad is going to get a lot of looks this year unless you're playing Ohio State, who has elite receivers. So I think he's going to be targeted quite a bit, and I went over.
I went over here. I really, really thought about going under because this feels like more of a Dante Manning game. UCLA is just like a little bit more spread out, kind of wider, so they might maybe want like the smaller, quicker guy out there compared to Manning. This is kind of the opposite style of an offense, but I still went over. I think what Eric said at the end there, it's just people aren't going to be targeting Jabbar Muhammad, and that leaves one other cornerback on the field to go target, and it's Nico Reed.
Yeah, I also went over for very much the same reasons. Just I don't think Dante Manning's. I actually think Nico's going to play more than Dante will this week. I think Jabbar Muhammad's not going to get targeted, and that means, like Jared said, only one guy really is going to get his opportunities, and it's going to be Nico Reed. I will say, like, I didn't really like. I don't know. I don't think they're going to try and go deep. So I'm curious how many times they're going to actually target guys, but I'm going over regardless of it. I don't know. I'm just picking Nico Reed to do it for some reason. All right. Score predictions. I guess I'll go first and then Jared and then Eric. I went back and forth. I think this is a game where the offense could put up 28 points in the first half and things be really, really good, and then they shut it down, and they just kind of get out of Dodge real quick like they did against UCLA. But I also think it could be one where it's kind of just a really slow, like methodical, grind-out, blowout victory. But I'm going to go with, Oregon wanting to look good on Friday night. Everyone's watching. You want to build some positive momentum going into Ohio State. You want to look good. You want to have things going your way. And then on top of that, I just don't think Michigan State's really going to score all that often. I don't think their defense is set up to have the athletes to match Oregon's. I think there's just going to be some big plays that happen. And I'm going to take Oregon covering the spread 41-14. 41 feels like a lot. I hovered almost all week in the 30s, but I just feel like one extra touchdown is going to happen. They're gonna want to look good going into next week, and having that momentum of a positive feeling off the field. So 41-14 Oregon.
I've got 38-14, so just a little less scoring game for Oregon. Regardless, I still feel like this should be another dominant win. Should be 3 straight, like I think we talked about at the very beginning. Oregon is a better team on paper. I think, again, if their offensive line holds as it has been with this quote-unquote new unit that's been in place for the last 2 weeks, I think they'll be just fine. I think that the run game hopefully gets going where there's a couple plays that Jordan James can burst off for 15 to 30 yards at a time instead of the usual 4 to 6 yards at a time, because that'll just open up passing lanes for Dylan Gabriel. We saw that against UCLA in the long touchdown to Tez Johnson. That's just a simple, like they fake the read option, the pitch option over on the left side, and then the defense bites and you hit them deep. So I think that'll kind of be the plan of attack. I think that usually is the plan of attack for Oregon moving forward. I'm hoping that it's an explosive offensive attack for Oregon, so everybody would shut the hell up about it, and that the offensive play calling is kind of vanilla. I don't think it is, and I think this will kind of prove that. And defensively, this is a team that has a lot of starters and returners from last year that did really well against an Oregon State team that had significantly more talent on the offensive side of the ball than this Michigan State team. And I think when you have guys like Jordan Birch, Mateo, and Jeff Bossa, Tyshim Johnson, guys in the secondary who played last year, who played well against DJ Uyunglele, I think it'll be a similar story. I think, like Matt said earlier, the strengths of this defense play into the strengths of a Michigan State offense. And despite Michigan State's willingness to throw the ball down the field with a 12.1 ADOT, I don't think that's going to matter too much. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure. I was just looking at on PFF, Aiden Child's average time to throw is 2.99 seconds. It's pretty quick. I think Oregon has some talent on the outside. So I only have them scoring 2 touchdowns, but I don't have them covering. I have them pushing 24 points.
I've got Oregon 34, Michigan State 13. I kind of liken this to a game where you play a team that's like really, this is a basketball analogy, I guess, that's really relying on like the big play on the 3-point shot. And they're, when they hit them, it's, it feels great. But when they don't, there's not a whole lot left. Well, Oregon is in this scenario, the team that has an offense that maybe doesn't hit a lot of the 3-point shots, but they get the ball around the basket, they score easy, and they, and they ultimately pull away. So, because I think when I look at Michigan State, I don't expect their run game to be really much of a factor in terms of like, oh my gosh, Michigan State ran for 180 yards in this game. I think they're probably going to run for less than 100. And I think what will happen is Childs is going to try to take some deep shots. I think he's going to hit a couple. Some of those are going to lead to points. Maybe they connect on like a 60-yard touchdown. But ultimately, I don't think their offense has enough like consistency or the ability to make things easy on themselves. Like I think it's going to be just a lot of like big plays that lead to possible Spartan points. So that's kind of what I think on that side. And like I said earlier, for Oregon's offense, I think it could feel a little bit like the last 2 games where maybe there's not a huge number of explosives, but it's a 10-play drive that goes 80 yards, get the touchdown. Maybe it takes a little more time off the clock than you're used to or that you prefer, but you end it with points. And I just think Oregon will end up kind of pulling away naturally. I do think this is a game that at halftime will maybe be like 21-10, and it'll be a little bit like, oh, this is a little dicey. But as the game goes on, I think Oregon pulls away and wins. Again, I define a blowout as three scores or more, and I think they'll get there again.
That was my biggest hang-up of 41 points was what happens in that second half. Like, I think they're going to be really good in the first half. And if they have a 3-point lead and it's very clear, like it was last week and the previous game before that, where their opponent cannot move the football, do they just kind of like turtle up a little bit and just go, all right, we're just going to run the ball, milk the clock, get out of here and shorten the game as much as we can just to prevent injury and, move on to the next week. Like, I think that was as much as they'll never say it. I think that was as much of what happened Saturday at UCLA in the second half, where like they were trying to score, but eventually it became clear, like, let's just get this game over with.
Well, yeah, and that last drive started with like 8 minutes to go or something, 7 minutes to go, and they just kind of matriculated down the field without really trying to be explosive.
Yeah. All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Next time you hear from us, it'll be post-game Friday night, recapping what happens at Autzen Stadium between Oregon and Michigan State. 6 p.m. kick. Games on Fox. Go to duckterritory.com for more coverage pre, and post-game. Until then, you're listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.